And so understand that government officials, just like anybody else, are human. And as a result, they will make decisions like humans. And they make decisions in their own self-interest. What is an official's self-interest? Number one, if you're an elected official, it's to get elected and then to get re-elected. And you would think that would be, you do that by doing what the majority of voters want. And it's really more, you don't necessarily do what the majority of voters want. You do often what is least bad for the majority of voters. And so the other incentive often is to make, and I think this is the case for everybody, make your job as easy for yourself as possible. And so the thing about understanding public choice is that public choice allows us to analyze how resources are allocated in government decision making. And we can look at how governments regulate or replace private markets and make decisions in those markets. And the key thing to understand is that government, unlike anybody else, government can grant itself a monopoly. So, government can grant itself a monopoly, and which is something that cannot happen in the private sector. No private sector business can just declare itself a monopoly and get rid of all other competitors. There are some that will try to develop that, but we know that monopolies, if they happen, do not last because other firms will follow what they do and come up with newer and more innovative things. Sears, Walmart, Amazon. There will be a competitor to Amazon that eats into its market share at some point. And I would venture to say that Amazon does not have a monopoly. But, so anyway, because governments can grant themselves monopolies, they can, again, they have a different set of incentives. And that's where the moral hazard theory comes into play, because there are essentially few consequences other than not getting reelected or not getting rehired for making a bad decision or harmful decision. There are few consequences to the individual. There is not really a great incentive to make, quote unquote, there's not a great incentive to absolutely make sure that you're doing the right thing for your consumers. And so the thing to understand about public choice is benefits are concentrated and costs are dispersed, okay? So those who benefit are incentivized and motivated to vote for those things that benefit them. Those who have to pay often are not as motivated, thus influencing policy. And Anthony Davies, who's a professor at Duquesne, likes to use this example. And, let's say there are 100 people, okay? And there is a policy that says 90 people will have to donate $10. 90 people will have to pay a $10 tax, okay? So we have $900. Of those $900, half of that money will be burned up. The other half will be given to 10 people. And so those 10 people will each receive $45. Those 10 people who are going to receive that $45 are going to be very motivated to vote because they will benefit. Now, let's say that there is a cost of voting, and we're not talking about a poll tax, where there's you would have to go in and pay a tax of $20. But even if it were, let's say there was a cost of voting, and that cost, again, doesn't necessarily have to be a tax, but the cost can be in the time and energy needed to A, go vote, but B, to research the candidates, to research their policies, to know the policies, to know what they're proposing. And let's say that cost to each individual person is $20. Well, the 90 people who would have to pay $10, it costs them more to think about voting than it would just to pay the $10. The 10 people who benefit from the policy, they're going to make they're going to make $45. And even if it costs them $20 to vote, they're still $25 ahead. So they're motivated to go vote. The other 90 are not. And so as a result, the policy may pass. And the idea here is because when it comes to government policies, the benefits are concentrated. And so the people who benefit from those are really, 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 really motivated to push for that policy. But the costs are dispersed. Each of us pays a very small amount. And I'll give you a good example here. In the city of Indianapolis paid about $700 million to build Lucas Oil Stadium. Now, the benefits are fairly concentrated. Most of us don't get a whole lot of benefit out of Lucas Oil Stadium. I do, because I happen to have a job that involves covering the Colts. So I make several $100s a year because the Colts are in town and they exist and I'm able to cover their games. The season ticket holders benefit because they have an extra entertainment option. The restaurants around downtown benefit. The parking lots and some of the downtown businesses benefit because of the people who go to games. Obviously, the Ursay family benefits as well. The concession workers and all that. So the benefits are fairly concentrated to one geographic area and to the team itself, the actual financial benefits to the team itself. There are some intangible benefits. Yes, we like being called an NFL city. We like having a local football team to root for. The 600,000 people in a typical year who are able to buy tickets. And again, many of those are season ticket holders. So it's more like, probably 150 or so thousand actual people out of the 2 million who live in the metro area actually attend a game or more each year. They benefit, but the costs are dispersed among the 2 million people or so who live in the metro area because it is paid for by a 1% tax on every restaurant purchase you make. It's a 1% food and beverage tax. Every time you go to the restaurant, you pay that tax, and that tax is levied not just in Marion County, but in, I think, all of the donut counties, including ours. So if you go out to eat in Wilkinson, you pay a 1% tax to pay for Lucas Oil Stadium that is 45 miles away and probably a place that doesn't really bring a whole lot of direct economic benefit to Wilkinson, Indiana. So the benefits are concentrated to government decisions, but the costs are dispersed. So therefore, those who benefit are really, really motivated to push for a policy. Those who pay are maybe not going to be quite as motivated to vote against it. And so politicians will generally then seek their own self-interest. So if we've got, let's say, 10 voters, okay, and we have 2 politicians here, okay, and politician 1 has a policy that will appeal to 3 voters, okay, all right, politician 2 has a policy that will appeal to these 2 voters, okay, these other voters here really don't like either policy, but they generally favor, they assume that politician 2's policy is less bad than politician 1's. So they'll vote for politician 2, even though they really don't like what that person is proposing. And so politician 1 says, wait a second, no, I was misrepresented. And he comes up with a policy that, again, is only really favored by this person here, but now it is less bad to these people than the policy that politician 2 had. So, so what ends up happening? Politician 2 comes out and says, wait a second, and tries to capture these voters, okay? So what ends up happening is what we refer to as the median voter theorem, which is that almost all policies end up trying to appeal to the voter in the middle. Because generally, you have about half of people are going to be on one side and half of people are going to be on the other side of every issue. And so if we appeal to this person in the middle, if we appeal to this person in the middle, we can if we appeal to this person in the middle, we can, we can capture all the voters on this side or capture all the voters on this side and win. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've got 11 voters, and so whoever captures this person in the middle is going to win 6-5. Okay? So even though this is the option, this person's preference is preferred by the least amount of people, this is still what ends up being pursued because it will win 6-5. Okay? And again, politicians are not necessarily as interested in doing the right thing for everybody as they are interested in doing the right thing for themselves as far as getting elected or reelected. Okay, so there's 5 major problems with government intervention in the economy. And one of them is that median voter theorem, which is what we refer to as the majority rule problem that we have just discussed. Majority rule voting can result in approval of projects where the costs are much higher than the benefits, and also can reject beneficial projects because people see the cost, but they don't see the necessary benefit. This is one reason why, public transit is often very politically popular, even though, again, it only benefits a few people. You look at in Indianapolis, there was a push for a large public transit system called, starting with the Red Line. Well, if you look at the decision making, the wise thing to do would have been to try to accommodate people who maybe are in town on business, who need to get downtown. And so the first line should have been built from the airport to downtown, because that's where you have people coming in from out of town, the people who probably most need to use high-speed, rapid public transit, airport to downtown. Where was it built? It was not built from the airport to downtown. It was built from Broad Ripple through Midtown, through downtown, and down to Fountain Square, and eventually down south to UIndy. Why? Because that is where the most vocal supporters of public transit live. Not necessarily, and so those people are going to benefit from it. They may not use it very much, but they're the ones who are most likely to benefit from it. They're the ones who are most likely to vote for it. And so to get it passed, they located the line in the spot where its most vocal supporters live, thereby getting them to vote for it. And however, people who live all around Marion County are having to pay the taxes for it. It was paid for through an increase in the income tax in Marion County. And so now people who live in Franklin Township, who are 10 miles from any stop on this line, are paying just as much as the person who lives within walking distance of it and takes it to work every day. Okay. So concentrated benefits, it benefits a few people, disperse costs. Everybody has to pay for it. So the second is the interest group effect, which is also kind of the same thing. Programs are approved that benefit a small group, but society as a whole pays the cost. And one thing we see, especially in Washington, but you also see this in the local governments as well, is what we call log rolling, which is where we trade votes of support. Hey, if you support my pet project and vote for it, I'll support yours and vote for it. And a lot of pet projects get tacked on to the end of bills, and that often benefit just one congressperson or one congressperson's district. The other problem is what we call the rational voter ignorance theorem. The idea that voters decide that being informed is not worth the cost. And that's kind of why we focus a lot of attention on presidential elections, but not a whole lot of attention on local elections. And why you end up with a lot of really, in a lot of cases, corrupt local officials, because people don't pay attention. Because being informed is just not worth the cost. And even when it comes to presidential elections, a lot of times we don't really know a lot about the policies. The last several presidential candidates haven't really talked about policies. They've sold their personalities. Donald Trump was a personality much more than he was a series of policies. Joe Biden was basically, his campaign was, I'm not Donald Trump. Okay, vote for me because I'm not him. And and Barack Obama was very intentionally vague about the policies that he pursued or was going to support, because we know that people are much more likely to vote on emotion than they are for a series of policies. Once you start talking about policies, now you give people reason to vote against you. Oh, I don't like that. And so, so politicians play on this rational voter ignorance to try to, focus more on their personalities than the policies they may or may not support. And so a lot of times you'll hear about the policies they support from their opponents in attack ads. Bureaucratic inefficiency. How many of y'all have ever been to the license branch? Okay. Customer service at the license branch, not exactly the greatest thing, right? You go, you take a number, you wait in line, you wait your turn. The person working may or may not be friendly. There's kind of this reputation, although this hasn't been my experience, of, licensed workers very unfriendly, and, they'll take your picture and then they will mail you a driver's license in the mail 10 days later. Okay. If you go to the license branch's website, which I have done several times, it is very difficult to use and very user unfriendly. Contrast that to, say, going to Walmart or going to the store. Things are very quick. You order something from Amazon, it's on your front doorstep 2 days later. What's the difference? Amazon goes out of business if it does not serve customers. The license branch does not. The license branch has a protected monopoly. And because of those monopolies, there is no incentive to improve customer service. The incentive is to make budget and to do what we have always done. So there are not really consequences for poor performance. You're not going to go out of business, okay? And, there's no profit motive there. And because of that, you end up with inefficiency. This is why there, for example, there are some people saying the government should take over the airlines. Well, if you've ever ridden Amtrak, you go, no. Why? Amtrak is very inefficiently run. Amtrak is a government-owned passenger rail service. And what do we know about Amtrak? It's frequently, and my full disclosure, my father used to be an engineer for Amtrak as a part-timer. But it's frequently slow. It's often slower than driving. It's frequently way behind schedule. Routes do not necessarily serve the customer's best interests, and they are not necessarily chosen because they're the most profitable. They're chosen because of the fact that they serve the districts of key Congress people. A privately run version of Amtrak, if it were profitable, would be, say, leaving Indianapolis at 7 or 8 a.m. and being in Chicago on a high-speed line at 9. Right now, we have one train to Chicago. It leaves at something like 4:30 in the morning and it arrives around noon. There's a train that goes east to Cincinnati that leaves at 1:30 in the morning and arrives in Cincinnati at about 4:30. And eventually carries on to Washington, D.C. It is timed not to provide the best service between Indianapolis and Cincinnati. It is timed so that people traveling to Washington will get the best views of the Shenandoah Valley. So while it certainly seeks to serve pleasure travelers, it does not serve the potential business travelers between the two major cities. And so, it's fairly inefficient. Why? Because there's a monopoly. Think about, you go to a store. All the good parking is right up front. It's free, and it is for customers. You go to a government building downtown. All the parking nearby is not free, and it is reserved for the people who work there. If you want to, do business there, you will have to park several blocks away and walk. Okay. So, and there's a short-sightedness effect as well. Officials favor things that have immediate benefits and long-term costs. And the reason for that is that officials can, it's easier to get reelected if people see the benefit now, and we can worry about the cost later. And so, politicians like shiny new toys because they know voters like shiny new toys. And so that short-sightedness effect, immediate benefit, long-term cost, and that is kind of the corollary of concentrated benefit and dispersed cost. And that is kind of the big problem that exists when there is government intervention. So, and so that's a basic overview of the concept of public choice. And so when people say the government should do this thing I like, why doesn't the government pay for it? Why doesn't the government take over the airlines? Why doesn't the government take over healthcare? Why, why? Because of all of these problems that tend to crop up and rise up when there is a protected government-run monopoly. Because, again, the key thing with an economy is incentives. And the incentives are different when you have a protected monopoly, number one. And number two, when you are not funded by voluntary exchange. When you're funded by involuntary exchange, so you have a guaranteed funding source, you have guaranteed income, and you have a protected monopoly, now that's where that moral hazard creeps in, where people's decision-making, they're not going to suffer the consequences of that. And the incentive then is either to make budget and keep your job if you're, a paid official, or if you're an elected official, to get reelected. And so you will do the thing that will get the majority of people to not necessarily do what you think is the best thing for the majority of people, but do the thing that will kind of least offend the majority of people so that you will get elected.